Stumbling out of his house, clutching his distended belly, he nearly collapsed in the street. His neighbors, catching sight of him, gasped in disbelief. "Is that Toby? The man who's always full of pride and boasting?" they whispered among themselves. "What on earth has happened to him?" Toby, now the spectacle of the village, could only stand there, his face pale and his eyes wide with terror. After that night, Sarah bid Ifanyi farewell, though her heart ached at the thought of him leaving. She watched him go, unwilling to let him out of her sight but careful to mask her feelings. She forced herself to behave normally, not wanting him to sense the emotions swirling inside her. Before he left, she packed some food into his flask, her quiet hope hanging in the air that he would return soon. Ifanyi smiled as he departed, and the warmth of his smile lingered long after he was gone. Soon, the village buzzed with whispers. The maidens, who had longed for Ifanyi's attention, noticed his frequent visits to Sarah's home. His comings and goings from her hut felt like a sharp thunderclap to their hearts, dashing the hopes they had nurtured for years. Some tried to console themselves, reasoning that Ifanyi couldn't possibly settle for a divorced woman like Sarah. After all, didn't his father and her family have unresolved tensions over a debt? Perhaps he was merely offering an apology on behalf of his father, trying to make amends for the cruel treatment Sarah had endured. They sat in their mother's kitchens, trying to quiet the storm of their thoughts, convincing themselves that there had to be another explanation. But then, they saw Ifanyi leaving Sarah's hut with a flask of food, and all their justifications crumbled. The sight was undeniable. He was eating from her pot, visiting her home each evening. The rich maidens, daughters of wealthy families, retreated into their homes, consumed by bitterness. They refused to eat or drink, their hearts heavy with jealousy and disbelief. Why must it be Sarah? They wept in silence. Why her, of all people? The sight of Ifanyi, the most eligible bachelor in the village, spending time with someone they considered poor and undeserving was too much to bear. They compared themselves to Sarah, questioning their own beauty and worth. "Aren't we pretty enough?" they cried. Why can't he follow his father's path and marry someone who could multiply his wealth, someone who came from a family of status? Yet no matter how they tried to reason, one thing was clear. Ifanyi wasn't just visiting Sarah, he was choosing her. And with each passing day, the maidens' hearts grew heavier, their sorrow deepened by the knowledge that Ifanyi's attention had settled on the one woman they had never imagined would capture his heart. In the community, it was widely believed that when a man ate from a maiden's pot, it was a sign of his interest, often leading to marriage. However, Sarah, living in the solitude of her late mother's hut, was unaware of these customs or the rumors that surrounded her. Her life was a relentless cycle of labor, rising before dawn to tend to her farm and returning home late at night, too exhausted to engage with anyone. She spoke little, her days filled with silence and solitude, leaving her out of touch with the gossip that buzzed around the village. Ifanyi, however, had heard the whispers. People speculated about his visits to Sarah, wondering if he was courting her after her failed marriage to Toby. But Ifanyi paid no mind to the rumors. His only concern was Sarah. Each time he visited her, he noticed how she remained unchanged, her demeanor calm and composed. Her normalcy soothed him, reassuring him that perhaps she hadn't been affected by the gossip. Or if she had, she didn't let it alter how she treated him. And that gave him hope. One evening, as the golden light of dusk faded into the soft shadows of night, Ifanyi found himself in Sarah's hut once more. The flickering flame of a small lamp cast long shadows on the walls as they sat together in the quiet of her home. He had decided tonight was the night to reveal his heart, to tell her what had been weighing on his mind for so long. Taking a deep breath he began, his voice low and steady. "Sarah," he said, watching her closely. "There's something I need to say to you." She looked at him, her eyes widening in surprise. She wasn't used to Ifanyi being so serious. Her expression shifted quickly, from happiness to what Ifanyi thought might be anger, but he pressed on, unable to hold back any longer. I understand why you rejected my proposal before. I know it was because of what my father did. His cruelty, the way he added interest upon interest to the debt your family owed. It was unforgivable. And I won't pretend it didn't happen. But I need you to understand something, Sarah. His voice softened and his gaze never leaving hers. I am not my father. Her face remained unreadable, but Ifanyi could feel the tension in the air. I was angry with myself for letting you slip away into another man's arms, for not speaking up sooner. But not anymore. I won't let that happen again. He paused, searching her eyes for any sign of what she might be feeling. She remained silent, but her expression softened slightly, and he knew she was listening. I've righted the wrongs my father committed. I paid back everyone he cheated, returned every piece of land he took by force. I've apologized to all the families he hurt, and I didn't do this for you. I did it for myself. For my peace. Because I refuse to live off the pain and sweat of others. Yes, I am the son of a wicked man, but I am not him. I want to build my life and my future on the foundation of sincerity and hard work, not on the suffering of others. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she listened to him speak. His words resonated deeply within her, stirring emotions she had buried for too long. She had spent so many years waiting, longing for a man who understood the value of hard work, who would treat her as an equal and build a life alongside her, not above her. As Ifanyi spoke, Sarah's heart softened, and she found herself whispering, almost to herself, "This is the man. Yes, this is the man I was looking for." Her voice trembled with pain, but also with a flicker of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. Ifanyi, sensing her shift, gently reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. "I did all of those things not for you," he repeated softly, his voice filled with conviction. "But for my peace. For the life I want to build, with someone who understands what it means to work hard and live with integrity." Sarah met his gaze, her tears now falling freely. She saw in Ifanyi not just a man of wealth, but a man who had fought for his own redemption, a man who shared her values and her vision for the future. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to hope, to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had finally found the partner she had been searching for. Ifanyi stood before her, his voice soft yet heavy with emotion. "I wake up early every day to build my own future and name. And I'm sorry I couldn't apologize for my father's cruelty toward your family, because I didn't know how to." He paused, his hands trembling slightly. "I loved you back then, Sarah. I really did," he confessed, his voice cracking under the weight of the words he hadn't planned to say. Noticing what he'd just admitted, Ifanyi glanced away, trying to compose himself. She stared at him, speechless. She hadn't expected him to say such things, and she certainly hadn't expected him to talk about love. He loved her. Back then. Her thoughts were a whirlwind, and her heart pounded in her chest. "I didn't know how to approach you with friendship," Ifanyi continued, his voice strained but steady. "I feared you would judge me wrongly, that you'd see me through the eyes of my father. I was never able to show you how genuine I was." He took a breath, realizing that her silent gaze had transformed into something deeper, a soft sob she couldn't hold back. Ifanyi's heart sank. Without hesitation, he gently placed his hand on her shoulder, comforting her as best he could. "Don't cry, Sarah," he whispered, his voice tender. Her tears, though quiet, carried years of pain, and for the first time, Ifanyi could see the depth of her wounds. But she didn't say anything, she just looked at him, her eyes filled with questions she wasn't ready to voice. "Does he still love me?" she wondered. "Now that I'm divorced, does it even matter?" Seeing that his words had stirred so much emotion in her, Ifanyi made the difficult decision to leave. "Maybe it's better I continue this some other day," he said softly, not wanting to burden her with more than she could bear. With a quiet goodbye, he left, leaving Sarah to the quiet hum of her thoughts. Meanwhile, across the village, Tobby stumbled into his house, weak and exhausted. He hadn't eaten all day, but worse than the hunger was the weight of his belly, a sight he still couldn't believe. His once muscular stomach now bulged like that of a heavily pregnant woman, a grotesque reminder of the strange curse he had found himself under. The stares of the neighbors had been unbearable, their eyes filled with disbelief and judgment. He slammed the door behind him, sinking into a chair, hoping, praying, that he was trapped in a nightmare. "This can't be real," he muttered, glaring down at his swollen belly. His anger boiled over, but no amount of rage could undo what had been done. He tried sleeping, hoping to wake up from this surreal torment, but every time he opened his eyes, the round belly greeted him with cruel certainty. That night, his hunger finally drove him to a friend's house. He knocked quietly, but when his friends saw him standing there, their jaws dropped. Their hands shot to their heads in disbelief, eyes wide at the sight of his belly. "What happened to you, Tobby?" one of them gasped. Tobby's explanation was a stumbling mess of anger and confusion, and as he finished, his friends could only shake their heads. "We don't have any food, Tobby," one of them admitted, embarrassed. "We always got by because of Sarah. She used to cook for us." At the mention of Sarah, Tobby's anger erupted. His eyes burned with rage, his fists clenched, but there was nothing he could do. He stormed out of the house, his mind a whirlwind of fury and helplessness. The next day, he stayed locked in his hut, cursing the beautiful maiden who had cursed him, cursing Sarah for leaving, and cursing himself for being so blind. His swollen belly was not just a burden but a symbol of his failure, a mark of the emptiness he had created in his own life. Now, as he lay in his darkened room, the weight of his actions crushed him as surely as the strange pregnancy he now carried. That afternoon, Tobby drifted into a deep, restless sleep, but it wasn't long before a strange presence crept into his dream. He found himself standing by the village river, its waters shimmering under a blood-red sky. From the mist rising above the water, a figure emerged, her laughter cold and haunting. Tobby squinted, trying to make sense of the vision before him. The woman stepped forward, revealing herself as the beautiful maiden he had just seduced. But there was something different about her now, something ethereal and terrifying. "I am no ordinary woman," she said, her voice echoing like the wind through the trees. "I am the goddess of this river, the protector of the innocent and the punisher of the wicked. I have heard the cries of your wife, Sarah, a woman blessed with a fertile womb, capable of bearing many children, but you, Tobby, have betrayed her. You deceived and broke her spirit, blaming her for your own cruelty and greed." Tobby's heart pounded in his chest as he fell to his knees in the dream, pleading with the goddess. "Please, forgive me. I didn't know what I was doing. I was wrong, please, spare me." But the goddess's laughter rang louder, colder. "Forgiveness? You expect mercy after the pain you have caused? She was never barren. It is you, Tobby, who are empty, cursed by your own selfishness. The punishment you now face will be a reminder of the suffering you inflicted on her." Before he could utter another word, the goddess vanished, leaving Tobby in darkness. He jolted awake, drenched in sweat, gasping for breath. "Sarah," he muttered, her name barely escaping his dry lips. A violent urge to vomit overtook him, stronger than before. Stumbling outside, he collapsed in the dirt behind his hut, retching violently. Neighbors gathered, their faces a mix of shock and disgust as they whispered among themselves. Tobby, his stomach now grotesquely swollen, looked up at them, desperation in his eyes. "Please, help me," he croaked, extending a trembling hand. But the villagers recoiled in horror. "Abomination," one of them spat. "The gods have finally punished him for all his wickedness. Who knows how many lies he told? He even blamed Sarah, a fruitful woman, for being barren. Their harsh words cut through Tobbi like a knife. The crowd dispersed, muttering curses, warning their sons and husbands to stay far away from him. As the news of Tobbi's pregnancy spread throughout the village, people began to gather at a distance, pointing and whispering. "The wicked man is carrying a curse," they said. "A fitting punishment for his sins." Soon, Tobbi noticed that even his friends had abandoned him. No one visited him anymore. Doors remained shut when he approached, and conversations fell silent when he passed. He stood alone, his once proud face now bloated with sadness and shame, clutching his swollen belly. His laziness, once a luxury, now became a curse. As hunger gnawed at him, Tobbi had no choice but to drag himself to the farm. The villagers watched from afar as he struggled to harvest, their disgust palpable. The sight of the pregnant man was so repulsive that they would cross the road to avoid him, their curses audible as they passed. Night after night, Tobbi sat outside his hut, staring at the sky, his face etched with regret. His belly, now large and heavy, twitched and kicked violently, tormenting him with sleepless nights and relentless pain. The baby inside, if that's what it was, never let him rest. It was as if every kick was a reminder of his cruelty, every jolt a punishment for the life he had destroyed. Alone, hungry, and in pain, Tobbi had no one left to blame but himself. Days passed, and Sarah found herself staring out into the distance every evening, her heart silently hoping for a glimpse of Ifanyi. With each sunset, she told herself he would come, that perhaps today was the day he would walk through her door again, his familiar smile brightening the space around her. But each night, she was left with nothing but the darkening horizon and the growing ache of disappointment. A week had gone by, and she wondered if she had imagined the connection between them, if his words had been empty after all. Then, one evening, just as the last of the daylight slipped away, Ifanyi appeared at her door, his smile warm and reassuring. But to his surprise, her face did not light up with the joy he expected. Instead, she looked at him with a mixture of sadness and frustration. She remained seated, barely acknowledging his presence, her gaze fixed somewhere in the distance. Sensing her mood, Ifanyi's smile softened, and he quietly sat beside her. "I know you're upset," he began gently, his voice filled with genuine regret. "I'm sorry." She turned her face away, her expression unreadable, but her heart betrayed her disappointment. She didn't have to say it, her silence spoke louder than any words. Who disappears for a week after saying such things to a woman? She thought bitterly, her emotions swirling. She had replayed their last conversation over and over in her mind, wondering if she had misread his intentions. Ifanyi, reading her body language, sighed and leaned a little closer. "I truly am sorry. I had to travel to the next village unexpectedly. The trip wasn't planned, and what was supposed to take 2 weeks, I finished in 1 just so I could get back to you sooner." At that, Sarah's tension seemed to ease, though she still avoided his gaze. After a moment, she quietly asked, "How was the trip?" Her voice was soft, but her curiosity had begun to replace her frustration. Smiling in relief, Ifanyi reached into a small bag he had brought with him. "It was fine. And I brought you something from the village." He handed her the bag. "They have the most beautiful fabrics there. I didn't know which one you'd like, so I brought a few." Sarah took the bag and opened it, revealing a selection of vibrant cloths, each one more stunning than the last. She couldn't help but smile, touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Ifanyi," she said softly, running her fingers over the fabrics. Her heart was softening, but something still lingered between them, something that needed to be said. As if sensing it, Ifanyi took a deep breath and spoke again, this time his tone more serious. "Sarah, there's something else I need to say. Something I should have said long ago." He paused, looking into her eyes. "I'm truly sorry for the way my father treated you and your family. His actions were unforgivable, And I know they hurt you deeply. I've carried that guilt for years, knowing it stood between us. But I want you to know I am not my father." Her eyes welled up with tears, and she nodded, the pain of the past still a fresh wound. "I know you're not him," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But back then, I was so blinded by anger and hurt. I didn't see you for who you really were. I care about you, Sarah. I always have. But I also understand that you need time to heal from Tobbi and everything that's happened. I don't want to rush you or force anything. Just know that I'm here. I'll wait as long as it takes." But she shook her head, surprising him. "You don't have to wait, Ifanyi. I've already made my decision." She looked at him with newfound clarity, her heart now sure of what she had been denying all this time. "This past week, I realized that I've fallen in love with you too. I was wrong about you before. I let my anger at your father cloud my judgment, and I didn't see the kind, good-hearted man you are. You're nothing like him. You've treated me with more respect and care than anyone else ever has." Ifanyi's heart swelled with joy, though he remained calm, squeezing her hand gently. "I promise you," he said, his voice full of conviction, "I will always see you as my equal, as someone I admire and cherish. I'll never take you for granted, and I'll always be by your side." Tears spilled from her eyes, but this time, they were tears of relief and happiness. She had been so afraid to open her heart again, but now, sitting beside Ifanyi, she felt at peace for the first time in a long while. She smiled through her tears, and Ifanyi brushed them away with his thumb, his touch gentle and reassuring. "Together," he whispered, "we'll build something new, something true." In that moment, under the quiet glow of the setting sun, Sarah knew her heart was safe. She had finally found the love and respect she had longed for all her life. Weeks passed, and Ifanyi soon informed Sarah of his intentions to officially seek her hand in marriage. When the day arrived, he came with his elders to meet her uncles, following the traditions of the land. The village buzzed with excitement, as people from neighboring communities flocked to witness the union. The once quiet paths were filled with color, music, and laughter as everyone celebrated the marriage of Sarah and Ifanyi. Villagers praised Sarah for her remarkable fortune, marveling at how she had turned her life around after the collapse of her first marriage. They blessed her union with Ifanyi, declaring that the gods had finally smiled upon her. But not everyone shared in her happiness. Outside their huts, heartbroken maidens sat, unwilling to accept the harsh reality that Ifanyi, wealthy, handsome, and kind, had chosen a divorced woman over them. Some collapsed in grief, while others, too proud to mourn openly, wept in silence. On the morning of the wedding, a group of distraught women, some of whom Ifanyi barely knew, gathered outside his home, their tears mixing with the dust. They asked him why he had chosen a woman who had already been married. Some of these maidens he had never seen before, yet they cried bitterly, hoping he might reconsider. Ifanyi, calm and composed, stepped outside to address the women. Though their sorrow tugged at him, he could only apologize gently. He knew he had done no wrong, his heart belonged to Sarah, and nothing could change that. His sincerity was unshakable, and even in the face of their tears, he remained steadfast in his decision. Once the wedding festivities ended, Ifanyi and Sarah settled into their new home. Unlike her first marriage, she felt an overwhelming sense of peace and security wash over her. She had found a true partner in Ifanyi, a man who respected her and treated her with love. Whenever she had a request or concern, he would listen, his face always warm with a smile, fulfilling her needs without hesitation. For the first time, she felt cherished, her heart no longer weighed down by worry or sadness. Meanwhile, in a neighboring village, Toby sat outside his hut, his once proud body now swollen and round, his belly growing larger with each passing day. The curse that had befallen him was a mockery of his arrogance, and as news of Sarah's marriage to Ifanyi spread, shame gnawed at him like a relentless pest. "Oh, what a blessed woman she is," people said, returning from the wedding with tales of her newfound joy. "She's married to the son of a rich merchant, she will never suffer again." Their eyes widened in awe as they spoke of her good fortune. "The gods have finally heard her cries," they whispered, laughing at the irony. And they punished Toby with his own pregnancy. The laughter of the villagers reached Toby's ears, but even as shame crept into his heart, his pride kept him from seeking forgiveness. He knew what he had lost, yet he couldn't bring himself to admit his faults, his swollen belly a constant reminder of the life he had thrown away. But despite the humiliation, Toby remained stubborn, unwilling to beg for mercy or redemption. The weight of his pride was just as heavy as the curse he now carried. After a month, Toby, now desperate and ashamed, realized he could no longer live with the curse that had transformed his once proud, muscular body into that of a pregnant woman. His belly had grown large and heavy, a punishment he could not escape. Overcome with regret, he begged his uncles to accompany him to Sarah's village to seek her forgiveness. They agreed, knowing the weight of Toby's wrongs and the justice in his suffering. Together, they made their way to the neighboring village, hoping that Sarah would show him mercy. When Sarah saw Toby, his swollen belly leading him through the village, a wave of pity filled her heart. She had never imagined seeing him like this, humbled and broken. Questions swirled in her mind, but there was no anger left in her heart. Beside her, Ifanyi stood, his protective instincts immediately kicking in. He had grown to love Sarah deeply, and while he was surprised to see Toby in such a pitiful state, his concern was for her. He feared Toby's intentions, but trusted his wife to handle the situation. Once they were seated, Toby fell to his knees before her, his eyes filled with tears. "Sarah," he began, his voice trembling, "I have come to beg for your forgiveness. The river goddess has punished me for how I wronged you, and I now carry the weight of my sins. Please, forgive me." She looked at him, her heart heavy but calm. "Toby," she said softly, "I hold no grudge against you. I have already moved on, and my heart has found peace with Ifanyi, who loves and cherishes me. You are forgiven." Toby's relief was immediate, tears streaming down his face as he thanked her over and over again. His uncles, too, expressed their gratitude, and with her forgiveness granted, they began their journey back to their village. As they left, Sarah and Ifanyi exchanged a knowing smile. It was clear to both of them that this moment had been orchestrated by the gods, a way of closing the chapter on Sarah's painful past and affirming the love they now shared. That night, as Toby sat alone in his kitchen, memories of the day flooded his mind. He thought of Ifanyi, a man who had every reason to be insecure or vengeful, yet had shown him nothing but kindness and grace. Ifanyi had welcomed him without resentment, his focus entirely on Sarah, not the past she shared with him. "That is love," Toby whispered to himself, "pure and true." For the first time, he understood what it meant to truly care for someone without expectation. The next morning, Toby woke up to an astonishing sight. His stomach was flat, his body restored to its former strength. He couldn't believe it. He rushed out of his house, dancing and shouting in joy, convinced it was a dream. But it wasn't. He was free. Overcome with emotion, Toby fell to his knees, crying bitterly, thanking the river goddess for her mercy and for releasing him from his curse. Meanwhile, Sarah's life with Ifanyi blossomed. Not long after, she became pregnant, and Ifanyi treated her like a delicate treasure. He pampered her, attending to her every need with tenderness and love. As her belly grew, so did their excitement for the future. When the time came, Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby boy who looked just like his father. They named him Obi, and together, they raised him to be a kind and respectful young boy who valued others. In the end, Sarah found the peace she had always longed for in the arms of a man who truly loved her. And as they watched their son grow, Sarah knew that everything, the struggles, the heartbreaks, and the pain, had led her to this moment of joy. She had finally found the happiness she deserved. The moral lesson of the story is about forgiveness, personal growth, and the transformative power of true love. It teaches that seeking forgiveness with genuine remorse can lead to healing, as seen with Tobby's redemption after recognizing his wrongs. Additionally, it highlights that true love, like the one between Sarah and Ifanyi, is selfless, kind, and focused on the present rather than the past. Ultimately, the story shows that peace and happiness come when we let go of grudges and embrace love and forgiveness. And this brings us to the end of our story. Please subscribe, like, and leave a comment, for it serves as an encouragement to our channel. Thank you for watching. See you in our next video.